Welcome to this O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are well into the book of Ezekiel now, and we're
ninth week.
Yeah, I know. We're about ready to make a turn. You don't know it yet, but we are about ready to make a turn here.
We are.
Especially in these next couple weeks, and it's moving fast at this point as we're looking toward the end of the book. It doesn't seem like it yet, but it really is.
Right. So last couple weeks, we talked about nations besides Israel that God was going to give his judgment on.
Yeah.
And we got through a number of them. We start out continuing that this week.
They're if you look at it geographically, he's gone all the way. God has gone all the way around now and circling the land of Israel.
Right. Right, and these were all nations who either treated Israel lightly or even went to war against Israel with Babylon.
Yeah, and the reason that I don't remember that we said it last time, but the reason that you're using that phrase "treated Israel lightly" is because that comes from the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12. Those who bless you I will bless, and I will curse those who treat you lightly. It's not the traditional rendering, but it is more accurate than just a simple "those who curse you I will curse." God takes any kind of mistreatment, heavy or not heavy, against Israel very, very strictly. And some of these nations, did not, shoot at Israel or attack them in war, but they sided with those who did, or they mocked them and mocked God.
Right.
And so...
Right. So God is defending his character.
Yeah.
In here.
Yep.
All right, so we're starting in chapter 32, and we're starting about in the middle of the chapter, verse 17. And what's gone on for now is Egypt's going to totally be destroyed, and now it's talking about what's happening to the people of Egypt.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start off with a question, is it talks about a pit, and all these people that have been killed go into a pit. Is this pit hell?
So, it mentions it a few times, last time and this time. So we're going to think of it, as hell, the place of the dead. They would not have had quite the same concept, that we have, just because of time and culture and everything. But also think of it from Egypt has a pretty big, if you think of Egypt's religion, they have a pretty big emphasis on the place of the dead and where you go when you die and everything, right? And the Greeks do and Romans do as well. But Egypt really had that big emphasis on the place of the dead. So that's what they would have thought. When he said the pit, they're thinking that, today in our modern language, we would think hell.
Right.
Because they're unbelievers too. Okay.
So God tells Ezekiel to wail over Egypt, which seems a little counter to everything. Why wail over them? So these guys and all the other nations that we've been talking about are going to get massacred by Babylon, and all of them are going to end up into what we're calling the pit, or if you want to call it hell, that's fine. So no matter how powerful they were on earth, no matter how beautiful their nation was, no matter how proud they were, I think back to Tyre, and how they had all their warships and really navy domination in there. It doesn't matter, right? They're all going to end up in the pit, and they would not be allowed to lie with fallen warriors of ancient time. It says in there, and they're going to be broken. Yeah. So there is some, even though they were the enemy or are the enemy, there still is some wailing or some understanding that not good things are going to be happening to these guys.
Yeah, and as the chapter comes to an end, this section against other nations really starts to come to an end, and God mentions a few of them again, right? And just like you, the Edomites will be there, the Sidonians will be there. Right. Some of these people that we've already seen, it's like he's really wrapping up this section. Nobody's going to be left out.
Yeah, well, that is a good point, because in chapter 33, we take a turn. Yeah. And we need to remember that Ezekiel was told that he can't speak to the Israelites in Babylon until a messenger comes that says Jerusalem has fallen. So he seems to be doing other things, maybe talking to other people, but he's not prophesizing in Babylon. God reinforces a lesson with him that he had previously told Ezekiel, and this time he uses a watchman as the example. And the idea is, Ezekiel, remember, you're the watchman, and you're standing on the tower, and you're looking out, and that's your job. Your job is to ring the bell when problems come that you can that you can see, and it's up for him. And he tells him. He tells them to blow the horn so others will know there's trouble. And like he talked about before, he runs them through the paces of if he blows the horn and no one heeds his warning, he's okay.
Yeah, that's on
Ezekiel
them.
himself is okay, right?
Yeah.
He's not going to be blamed for the responsibility of the people's deaths. But if he doesn't blow the horn, if he doesn't do the warning, God's going to hold him responsible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's he responsible for? He has to pass along the message that God has given him to the people.
Yeah. Yeah. What is he doing with that message that God has given him?
Yeah.
I think there's one verse in chapter 33, verse 11, that I think is really significant, and I want to make sure that we point out here. Sometimes God is accused of, especially, and how many chapters have we just spent talking about he's going to destroy people and nations and all this stuff, and sometimes God gets a bad rap as some kind of genocidal maniac, right? Well, have you read the Old Testament? God just destroys people and all this stuff, and he seems to have this perverse, enjoyment of killing people or whatever. And I think there's a really neat reality check, character check here in verse 11, where God says, "Say to them, as surely as I live." Can't swear on anything higher than God, so he swears on himself. "I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked."
Right.
I mean, after how many ever chapters of judgment, and then another twice as many chapters on judgment on Israel as well, you start to think, maybe God likes this a little bit. And he says, listen, I hate it. I hate it. I have my justice, my righteousness, all of this stuff says that punishment is deserved. But so if he doesn't take pleasure in the doesn't take pleasure in the death of the wicked, what does he want? "I prefer that the wicked change his behavior and live. So turn back, O Israel, from your evil deeds. Why should you die?" It's always about repentance.
Yeah.
He's always calling people back to repentance, right?
Repenting.
Individual, that's today, that's back then, that's everything. And that's a huge thing that we, especially as Christians, we need to make sure we remember. That's not a New Testament thing. Well, Jesus in the New Testament is different than the God of the Old Testament. No, he's not. Right. And this is one of those places we see that very, very clearly.
Nice. Thanks for that reminder. So in the second half of this chapter, we learn of the fall of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So on January 19th, 585 BC, word reaches the exiles in Babylon that Jerusalem has fallen.
Yeah.
So I picture a guy running.
It's a long run.
Maybe take some breaks.
Yeah, 586 it actually took place, and then the news had to reach Babylon.
Yeah. So King Nebuchadnezzar sieged Jerusalem. Took about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then they finally broke through, and I don't know how long the battle took, but it doesn't seem to have taken very long.
Well, and so this was the third of three. So in the first siege, Nebuchadnezzar took some of the royals, some of the handpicked, some select captives. That would have been Daniel. The second time would have been when Ezekiel was actually taken. Right. And now this third time, it's over with. Jerusalem is now fallen. The temple is destroyed. It is over with now. Right. There are still some people there, but Israel's not lasting. It seems to be where we
get no stone unturned.
Yeah.
Right? The walls completely knocked down, temple completely knocked down.
Yeah, we find this in Jeremiah as well. So for tracing, so we have Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, which is exactly the opposite order they are in the Bible. But Jeremiah is there at the fall of Babylon, and he sees what's going on. They try to kidnap, some of the Israelites try to kidnap him and take him to Egypt, which is why Egypt is a big part of what God is talking about. You're still trying to find safety and help in Egypt. Jeremiah wasn't, but he was going to be kidnapped. But so we see all of these guys about the same time, right?
Right.
And their prophecies.
So Ezekiel has to give a message to the Israelites in Babylon, and to me, it's a really odd message. And the message is, even after they were captured and sent to Babylon, even after God gave them generations of stop sinning or bad things are going to happen, even after Jerusalem has fallen, the message is, you're still sinning. You still have idols. And so God now says, what makes you think you're going to get your land back?
Yeah.
And I think that had to hurt
Yeah.
in there. So Ezekiel was to say to them, the remaining people living in the ruins, they're going to die by the sword. Those in the country will die by wild animals, and those in strongholds will die of disease.
Yeah.
And same thing that God said, maybe put a little different way.
Yep.
And then Ezekiel says, then you will know that he is our Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ezekiel does get a little bit of minor satisfaction. As a person, he has gone through a lot, right? And been tough. And God basically says, look, the people are going to come in crowds. They will sit and they will listen to you. Not a one of them is going to obey.
Yeah. Yeah.
They talk lustfully, but they think about themselves. You're like a play, an actor reciting lines, singing a song to them. But then all this comes true, and then they will know that there's a prophet among us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, wow.
On the one hand, yeah, like you said,
There's
it
that
was
little switch.
little weird because, public speakers, whether it's pastors or politicians or concert, musicians or whatever, you like to see a crowd. You like to have people there. And God said, Ezekiel, you're going to have a large crowd. And he's, really? Yeah, but they're not going to listen.
No, they'll listen. They're not going to do anything.
They're not going to do anything about it. Yeah. So, just because you have a large crowd doesn't mean that.
Well, again, God's saying, look,
yeah, right.
I've been dealing with this for centuries.
Yep. They're going to treat you just like they're going to treat, a movie or a play or a concert. They're going to clap at the end and then go home.
Yeah. But I love that final part where he says, but in the end, they'll go, we did have a prophet
Yep.
among us.
Yep.
All right, chapter 34, the prophecy here is to shepherds, and not shepherds with flocks and sheep, although that's the illustration on here. But these would have been the religious officials, the priests.
Yeah.
And God is furious with them.
There's a whole chapter dedicated to scolding the religious leaders. Yeah.
So they're hurting the sheep.
Yeah.
So if you think about it from the standpoint of the sheep, would be the Israelites. These are God's people entrusted for care. Mm-hmm. That makes the shepherds, the kings, all the officials, whether elected or appointed, and also all the priests.
Yeah.
They're the ones doing all the hurting.
Yeah.
Which is really unbelievable. So they're not doing their job. Instead of protecting, they're hurting. They're doing the opposite of their job.
Yep.
But now the sheep has been scattered, and now there's no shepherds either.
Yep.
And God says, "Look, I'm against the shepherds. I'm going to take the sheep off their hands.
Yep.
They are no longer shepherds. The shepherds will no longer feed themselves by the sheep.
Yep.
Which is important, right? The sheep are doing all the work versus." Jesus coming and saying, I am the shepherd taking care of the sheep.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a theme that shows up a lot, Old Testament and New Testament. So Israel was God's flock in the Old Testament, and God himself was we'll say the chief shepherd, right? Yep. And then he had the religious leaders and kings and priests and judges and prophets as the under shepherds. In the New Testament, God uses that same illustration with the church. Right? So the church is God's flock, which he bought with his own blood, and Jesus is the chief shepherd, and then the elders, pastors are the under shepherds. So we're not saying that they are exactly the same. We're saying he uses the same illustration for two different groups, right? Not that the groups are just one group, but he's actually using the same illustration because it's a good illustration. right?
Right. The whole taking care of
Yeah,
and,
right.
and being there.
We see Psalm 23, David as a shepherd, and he'll show up here. David was like a literal shepherd before he became a spiritual shepherd, and a king, and he goes back to the Lord as my shepherd, right? And the how shepherds are supposed to function, and what sheep are supposed to remember, is wrapped up there in 6 verses in Psalm 23.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Right. So God continues with the sheep. He says that he will judge the sheep too, and he uses a term which took me right to Revelation with the rams and goats and sheeps and goats, kind of in there, and he says that he's going to separate the lean from the fat, and of course the fat sheeps would be the ones who received the benefit from the shepherd, which wasn't as pure as the lean sheep who had to struggle. But he's going to keep his sheep safe, and then he will set one shepherd for the sheep, and it says name David. So does this mean we know that David's going to come back? So does this mean that David is going to be over Israel?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Yeah. So so I take it very literally, because it doesn't say the son of David or like David or the Davidic king.
Yeah,
it actually literally
David.
says David. In Jesus' kingdom, Jesus is not going to be just king of the Jews or king of Israel. He's going to be king of the world. Right? And under his reign, Israel will be ruled differently than the Gentile nations, right? And Israel will be ruled by King David. King David will be resurrected, and he will be king over Israel again under the son of David, who will be king over the whole world, right? And there will be multiple levels of government, both on the Israel side and for the Gentile side. But and we'll see David show up here several times toward the end of Ezekiel. And I think some people say, well, no, I think it's really referring to the son of David. There is a piece coming up in a couple of weeks where I think it's really clear that it has to be David, not just the son of David, not the Davidic king.
Okay.
Yeah.
God also says he's going to make a covenant of peace with them. So would this be the new covenant that we talk about, or just the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant?
Yeah, so both. It'll be the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant for living in peace, what it talks about, but it says rid the land of wild beasts as well. That's new covenant. That's when the curse is removed in the millennium, and that's going to show up here very quickly in a couple of chapters as well.
Okay.
So yeah, we're thinking end times in a lot of these upcoming chapters here.
Right. And then chapter 35, we go back to another country, and God refers to it as Mount Seir. This is really Edom.
Yeah.
Right? And it actually says it in verse 15 in there. So this is the home of Esau's descendants. What did they do to Israel? And God says unrelenting hostility and killing of Israelites. And God will subject Edom to this bloodshed because of this. And then, of course, he ends with, then you will know that I am the Lord.
Yeah, so it's interesting because in this area, Moab and Edom, that God has said he's going to judge harshly. During the tribulation, that area will not be under Antichrist's control. God is actually going to use that area of Moab and Edom to protect Israel during the tribulation. But that doesn't mean they're off the hook, right? In the millennium, that area will be desolate, and Israel will be around them. And so there's going to be a little bit of a switch here. So again, we're talking end times, not just Babylon's day and Ezekiel's day here.
Yeah, he also said they had envy of Israel's land, right? So they're coveting the land, and they also hurled insults against God. And God said, I heard them.
Yeah.
I heard them all. And so now they're rejoicing because Israel's land is available to them. And God says, it's going to be really short-lived.
Yeah.
And again, he ends with, "Then you will know that I am the Lord."
Yep.
And that's the way we finish up our reading today. So, like you said, we take a turn.
Yeah.
We went back a little bit here in this last chapter, but I think we continue with that turn.
Yeah. So from here on, we're talking, the rest of the book really is going to be focusing on the end times. And this section is what sort
Kinda
of
transitions
started
to it,
getting
yeah.
us into that. Yeah.
Yeah, so nice.
Yeah. So, if you thought that this was maybe it's sort of interesting but not interesting, all this judgment on all these other nations, hopefully you can see where we're headed, because this promised judgment, some of it was past, but some of it is still future. And again, the rest of the book is really thinking more end times, and we're starting to see that here. So. Some fun stuff yet to come. So hope you're enjoying the reading. If you have questions and comments, as always, make sure you send those our way. We love answering those. And share this with your friends and family, and subscribe and like and do all those things, because you don't want to miss what's coming up here soon. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.